Welcome to the deep dive. Our job is to take these complex, often really politically charged narratives, stack up the sources, and trace them back to their absolute roots to understand what's really happening. Today, we are deep diving into the ultimate modern political supervillain, the liberal billionaire George Soros.
George Soros he's so much more than just a wealthy donor or a political financier at this point. In recent years, he has been consciously transformed into a kind of shorthand, a symbol for everything that populist and far-right movements believe is corrupting their societies, whether it's here at home or globally.
Right, and that's the setup. It's a really high-stakes one. This deep dive is going to analyze the recent surge in political and crucially legal maneuvers directed specifically at Soros and his progressive groups in the U.S. Because this isn't just political mudslinging anymore. We're talking about actual government directives seeking criminal charges.
Precisely. We're going to look at the tactics being deployed, the calls for racketeering charges, the designation of political stances as terrorism, and trace these very modern attacks to the historical foundations they rely on. And those are these deeply potent anti-Semitic myths about shadowy global influence and control.
So let's jump right into that immediate flashpoint, because this escalation, it really started at the highest levels of the U.S. government.
It did. We have to start with the reports concerning the Trump administration's Justice Department. Our sources, including the New York Times, indicated there was a specific directive to consider potential federal charges against the Open Society Foundations, or OSF, and other left-leaning organizations.
Okay, so when you hear about the government weighing charges against a major philanthropic foundation, you have to ask, what kinds of charges are we even talking about? This isn't usually where criminal law and civil society intersect.
Well, the list was alarming. It was clearly targeting the very legitimacy of these organizations. They were reportedly considering charges including, and this is crucial, material support of terrorism and arson. This directive came right after former President Trump posted on Truth Social, reiterating his intention to aggressively target groups he claimed were funding or aiding radical leftist terrorists in the United States.
And that's the mission right there. We are not here to debate the merits of Soros's progressive politics or whether massive philanthropy inherently interferes with democracy, though, those are vital debates. Our goal is to analyze the strategy behind turning this one man into a public enemy, and specifically how these modern severe accusations of arson or terrorism funding leverage and adapt centuries-old historical myths.
Yes, and we have to set the tone on this right away. First, let's acknowledge that Soros's financial influence, channeled through his, $32 billion in lifetime donations to OSF, is genuinely substantial. That is a fact.
Yeah.
But second, the accusations that accompany that influence, they are frequently weaponized. They slip into completely baseless claims that are rooted in these centuries-old anti-Semitic tropes. The classic idea that a single conniving individual is the shadowy puppet master controlling worldwide events. And separating that fact from the fiction is what we're tracking today.
All right, let's start with the heavy artillery the government was threatening to deploy. This potential use of the ICO Act, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, against left-leaning organizations. For our listener who might only know ARCO from old gangster movies, what exactly is it, and what's the irony of applying it here?
ARCO is a serious piece of legislation. It was passed in 1970 and is designed specifically to target and dismantle large, ongoing criminal enterprises. It lets prosecutors charge the leaders for crimes they ordered or assisted in, even if they didn't personally, commit the underlying illegal acts. The key thing is that a prosecutor has to establish a pattern of racketeering activity that happens over a period of time. Historically, it was used against groups like the mafia, later against, say, corrupt police departments or labor unions.
So it's a tool built for prosecuting organized crime. How on earth does that translate to political donations and philanthropic work?
That's the core tension. The irony is it's powerful because officials have recently threatened or attempted to use RICO charges as a kind of cudgel against protesters or activist groups. To apply it to a philanthropic foundation like OSF, the government would have to somehow prove that the very structure of the foundation is a criminal enterprise and that their core activity grant-making is the pattern of racketeering activity.
That is a staggering legal threshold to cross. It seems almost impossible. What specific accusation was laid at Soros's door?
The former president explicitly accused Soros of racketeering. He called for him to be imprisoned specifically for his contributions to progressive causes. What this accusation does, it tries to equate legitimate philanthropic and political donations, which are protected under campaign finance and free speech laws, with organized criminal activity.
And that specific charge, material support of terrorism, how does that fit in with these broader financial attacks?
It's the ultimate escalation. It's the connection that links these modern political attacks directly to historical conspiracy tropes. If you look back in history, when ethnic or religious minorities were blamed for societal collapse, they were accused of sabotage or poisoning wells or revolutionary conspiracy. These were claims designed to criminalize their mere existence. The modern equivalent of blaming them for destroying infrastructure is the accusation of arson. And the modern equivalent of accusing them of revolutionary plotting is the charge of material support of terrorism. By applying those labels to OSF's grant-making, the attackers are suggesting that supporting democratic ideals or social justice is, in itself, criminal, that it's designed to subvert the state through violence.
That's a really powerful conceptual link. Okay, so moving back to the response, how did the Open Society Foundations handle this direct threat?
They issued a very strong public statement. They called the accusations outrageous and false. They countered this suggestion of criminality by just emphasizing their mission, advancing human rights, justice, and democratic principles globally. And they stressed that they do not support or fund violent protests, and that they stand for the fundamental freedoms guaranteed by the Constitution, which includes free speech and peaceful assembly. They made it pretty clear that they see this threat as a fundamental attack on the ability of any American to fund causes they believe in.
And shifting from the specific ora acua threat to the rhetorical targeting of groups, we also saw the formal designation of Antifa as a terrorist organization through an executive order.
Yes, and this represents a significant escalation in rhetoric. It equates leftist critique with formal terrorism. The order signed by the administration officially declared Antifa a domestic terrorist organization. But, and the expert analysis points this out, there's a crucial legal fact here. The U.S. has no current legal framework to formally designate a domestic group as a terrorist organization. To do that, you'd need an act of Congress or some kind of legal precedent that just doesn't exist.
Right, and that's because the whole concept of Antifa is so amorphous, isn't it? It isn't a central headquarters with a CEO and a budget.
Exactly. The source material is clear on this. Antifa is not a cohesive entity. It's not a centralized organization with a governing structure and funding streams. It's more of a political stance, a shortening of anti-fascist. It's an ideology, a banner used by all these disparate groups. And while individuals who align with that stance certainly engage in organizing and sometimes violence, the legal claim that there's a centralized network that can be dismantled and designated like ISIS or Al-Qaeda, well, it's legally unsupported and functionally impossible to prove.
And yet, the designation was pushed so vigorously. What justification did the administration even provide for targeting these left-leaning groups and escalating the rhetoric to such an extreme?
The motivation they cited included specific instances of political violence. They referenced the killing of a right-wing activist, a man named Charlie Kirk. They also talked about a high-profile shooting that occurred at an ICE jail in Dallas. These events were put forward as kind of proof that a coordinated, Soros-funded radical left was responsible for the majority of domestic violence.
Okay, this is a moment where we really need to stop and apply the factual lens. What did the investigation into those two specific acts of violence actually reveal?
And this is the crucial factual context, according to our source material. There is no evidence, zero, that either the gunmen involved in the killing of Charlie Kirk or the shooting at the Dallas ICE jail were affiliated with left-wing groups, let alone groups connected to OSF. The assertion that left-leaning organizations are coordinating or funding the majority of political violence is explicitly identified as false by external analyses.
So, if the violence used to justify this legal escalation wasn't linked to the left, where is the bulk of domestic political violence in the U.S. actually coming from?
Well, there's a quantitative counterpoint. A study in The Conversation, which is consistent with FBI data, shows that the vast majority of politically motivated violence in the U.S. has come from the right. Based on government and independent analyses, right-wing extremist violence has been responsible for approximately 75 to 80% of U.S. domestic terrorism deaths since 2001.
That's a staggering data point. It completely reframes the entire narrative. When the administration is claiming they're going after the groups causing domestic terrorism, the data shows they're actually targeting the political opposition that accounts for less than a quarter of the actual fatalities.
That's the strategic function of the accusation. It shifts the entire focus away from the true, well-documented source of lethal domestic violence. Now, to be fair, some critics would argue that focusing only on deaths minimizes the impact of organized violent protest. That property destruction and disruption are still forms of domestic terrorism that should be prosecuted.
That's a fair counterargument. How does the data address that specific type of political disruption, which is often what groups like Antifa are accused of?
Well, data on non-lethal political violence is harder to categorize definitively. But the attempt to label OSF as funding arson and terrorism goes far beyond simple street protest. It's an attempt to retroactively criminalize any funding of dissenting groups, regardless of their peaceful nature, under the guise of stopping organized crime.
So, given these legal and rhetorical threats, how did progressive organizations respond? I mean, they clearly saw this as an attempt to criminalize dissent.
Dozens of left-leaning nonprofits signed an open letter. They vowed to challenge any efforts to criminalize dissent. And they asserted that organizations shouldn't be attacked for carrying out their legitimate missions or expressing their core values. They rejected these attempts to exploit political violence, often violence they themselves condemn, to mischaracterize their work or restrict fundamental freedoms. For them, this political and legal campaign sends a chilling message to any potential donor or progressive group. If you fund the opposition, you risk federal prosecution.
This whole political strategy, using financial attacks and criminalizing dissent, it feels very modern. But as you noted, the reason it works, the reason Soros is the perfect target is because it taps into something ancient. We're moving now from the Justice Department to, well, centuries of conspiracy theory.
That's right. The modern attacks against Soros are just a highly effective repackaging of the myth of excessive Jewish power. It's essential to grasp the scale of this claim versus the statistical reality. Jews account for only 0.2% of the global population, just a tiny fraction. Yet this anti-Semitic belief persists that this tiny minority isn't just seeking total world domination, but is already in complete control of global finance, media, industry, and government.
And the claims can be fantastically bizarre. They try to link a handful of families or individuals to events that are way beyond human control.
Exactly. I mean, look at the D.C. City Council members' claim in 2018 that the Rothschild family, a Jewish banking family, was controlling the climate to create natural disasters they can pay for to own the cities. Or just the constant historical deployment of this myth. Jews have been blamed for economic crises from the Great Depression to the 2008 recession. The core unchanging idea is that Jews are manipulative, conniving schemers who work in the shadows to advance an evil global agenda designed to destabilize Gentile society.
And the historic blueprint for how this shadowy global control is supposedly organized is laid out in one single, notorious document that continues to influence worldviews today.
That document is, of course, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. This was an elaborate literary forgery, crafted and first circulated by the Tsarist secret police in Russia around the turn of the 20th century. They did it specifically to deflect attention from Russia's own internal governance problems by blaming the Jews.
What specifically did the protocols claim to reveal, and why was it so effective as propaganda?
The protocols claimed to be the secret minutes from a meeting of Jewish leaders, and it detailed a precise multi-generational plan for world conquest. It was effective because it was so specific, and it offered this totalizing, easily digestible explanation for all of society's problems. It claimed they would control all the world's gold, they'd manufacture dissent to break down social cohesion, use the media to corrupt youth and spread false narratives, and ultimately infiltrate every single non-Jewish government. It was the ultimate hidden enemy narrative.
And despite being pure fiction and being definitively proven a forgery, its influence is terrifyingly widespread.
Oh, its influence is long-lasting and incredibly toxic. It heavily influenced Nazi ideology. It was cited constantly in Der Stürmer as proof that Jewish people were engaged in a global war against Germany. In the United States, the automaker Henry Ford, at one point one of the most famous men in the world, he published a whole series of anti-Semitic articles based on the protocols in his weekly newspaper. He later republished them as a very influential book, The International Jew.
And globally, it's not just historical context. It's still cited by powerful political figures today.
It remains widely read and accepted as fact in many parts of the world, especially across the Middle East and parts of Asia. Leaders like Turkey's Recep Tayyip Erdogan have used these conspiracies. In Malaysia, former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, who once focused on Soros's Jewish background and his attacks, had previously accused him of orchestrating the 1997 Asian financial crisis based on these tropes, though he did later claim he accepted Soros was not responsible after meeting him.
So, if the Rothschilds or the shadowy elders were the villains in the past, George Soros is the absolute modern-day placeholder for the same destructive global force.
Absolutely. Soros becomes the contemporary iteration of the classic anti-Semitic octopus trope. This was a common, virulently racist image depicting Jews as the head of an octopus, with global tentacles stretched out across the world, strangling nations. He's a perfect insertion into this framework. He's immensely wealthy, he works in international finance, and he is Jewish. And crucially, his philanthropic work funding groups in over 100 countries allows his critics to easily label him a globalist and connect his activities to the supposed tentacles outlined in the protocols.
You can really see the direct transposition of claims from the protocols onto Soros in the rhetoric of influential conservative and extremist figures in the U.S.
Well, take the claims about media control and finance. David Duke, the former Grand Wizard of the KKK, claims that the American media, political system, and Federal Reserve are dominated by the Jewish Zionist cause. This is Protocols 101. Similarly, the conspiracy theorist Alex Jones claimed that Jews are the head of the Jewish mafia in the United States and run Uber, they run the healthcare. The rhetoric is just a mirror image of the forgery, simply updated with contemporary targets like Uber and healthcare.
And these tropes adapt so rapidly to new crises, acting like that viral blueprint you described.
The COVID-19 vaccine rollout is a perfect example of that rapid adaptation. Conspiracies immediately arose, highlighting the fact that Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla has Jewish heritage. They claimed this fact provided evidence that the entire vaccine effort was part of a calculated long-term Jewish plot to institute a global Jew government. When you're searching for a hidden global master plan, any prominent Jewish figure associated with a global event, be it finance, pandemics, or protest, becomes the immediate focal point, regardless of the facts.
Right, there's that classic anecdote involving the Voltaire misquote that perfectly encapsulates how dangerous and easy it is to invoke this history, even by people who might not understand the deep anti-Semitic context.
That's the critical anecdote. In 2020, a prominent civil rights leader, the then president of the Philadelphia NAACP, a man named Rodney Muhammad, shared a widely circulating anti-Semitic meme. It depicted a Jewish man wearing a kippah and pressing a large, bejeweled hand down on a faceless mass of people. And below it was a quote, incorrectly attributed to the French philosopher Voltaire. To learn who rules over you, simply find out who you are not allowed to criticize.
So what does that quote attached to that image communicate in the context of this history?
It weaponizes the concept of free speech against a specific minority. It implies that Jewish people have such absolute untouchable power that criticizing them is forbidden. That's a hallmark of the puppet master narrative. As one organization pointed out, the image itself, with the Jewish man pressing down on people, reinforces the very old trope of Jewish global domination and control. It's a powerful illustration of how the language of populism and the language of ancient anti-Semitic conspiracy can merge, often without the user even understanding the deep, destructive history they are invoking.
Okay, we need to ground this back in George Soros's actual work before we move into the specific conspiracy claims. What's the reality of his philanthropy? Who is he, and what is the Open Society Foundation's truly trying to do?
Well, George Soros's personal history is crucial here. He was born in Hungary in 1930, and he survived the Nazi occupation and the Holocaust by hiding with his family. That experience profoundly shaped his worldview. After he became this vastly successful financier, he moved into philanthropy, and he was inspired directly by the philosophy of Karl Popper. Specifically Popper's 1945 book, The Open Society and Its Enemies. That book argues that societies must be built on democratic principles, human rights, and critical thinking, rather than rigid, closed, or authoritarian ideologies. That is the genesis of his foundation's name.
And what's the scale and mission of the OSF?
The Open Society Foundations is a massive international grant-making network. It was established in 1993, and now it works in over 100 countries. Its broad mission is to support tolerant societies, democratic governance, human rights, and independent media. Since 1984, Soros has given away over $32 billion to OSF, which makes it one of the largest private funders of groups working for justice and democracy in the world. His early work was focused on supporting black students in apartheid South Africa and funding dissidents resisting communist regimes in Eastern Europe, a fact that makes his current opposition by post-communist leaders deeply ironic.
Okay, so let's tackle the most prolific claims about his funding, that he secretly funds domestic protests and civil disorder.
These domestic claims really exploded during the 2020 George Floyd protests and the 2018 migrant caravans. Soros has been falsely accused of orchestrating and funding these movements with these specific sensational allegations, that he hires protesters through shadowy agencies, or that he rents fleets of buses to transport them, or directs people to stash bricks to facilitate riots.
Right, the pallets of bricks hoax is one that seems to go viral during every single major protest event across the country.
It's a perfect example of how easily a conspiracy virus mutates. The viral claims that Soros-funded organizations dropped off pallets of bricks near IC facilities or police stations were widely circulated during the Los Angeles ICE protests and subsequent civil unrest. Fact checks confirm that the photo of stacked bricks, often used as proof, actually originated from a Malaysian construction supply company, completely unrelated to the U.S. protests. The hoax itself has just been recycled over and over again. The reality is that protests like those following George Floyd's death were genuine, massive gatherings of thousands of Americans responding to systemic issues, not some funded operation directed from afar.
And we have to emphasize that these hoaxes are not harmless memes. They lead directly to real-world violence.
They absolutely do. The misinformation machine can link directly to tragedy. We saw this in 2018 with Cesar Sayok, a man from Florida who was obsessed with Soros conspiracy theories and the migrant caravan hoax. Sayok mailed pipe bombs to Soros and a dozen other prominent Trump critics. And that tragic event just underscores the real-world danger when legitimate philanthropy is conflated with baseless accusations of funding domestic terrorism.
And more recently, we saw the exact same playbook used against the 2024 pro-Palestine student demonstrations. The claim is that OSF was directly paying student radicals to occupy university campuses.
This specific claim is a textbook example of mixing a tiny nugget of truth surrounded by a curtain of lies. The nugget of truth is that OSF has transparently funded organizations that advocate for Palestinian rights and peaceful resolution to the conflict, which aligns with their mission of supporting open societies globally. Specifically, between 2016 and 2022, OSF granted $700,000 to the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, or USPCR, and $875,000 to Jewish Voice for Peace.
So funding advocacy groups is true. What's the specific lie being propagated about the 2024 protests?
The lie is the implication of current direct operational funding for the encampments and disruptions. The funding OSF gave was awarded years before the 2024 protests even began. Furthermore, while the rumor claimed USPCR paid 3 student organizers through a fellowship program, those individuals were former fellows. They were organizing the 2024 protests independently and were not receiving payment from USPCR in April 2024. The money was for general operational and advocacy work, not for compensating current student mobilization. The goal of the conspiracy is to strip legitimacy from the student movement by claiming they are merely paid actors of a foreign hand.
And outside the U.S., Soros is frequently blamed for organizing entire governmental overthrows, the so-called color revolutions.
This is a consistent talking point. It's amplified especially by Russian official media and governments that are seeking to maintain authoritarian control. Soros is frequently blamed for organizing movements like Serbia's Bulldozer Revolution in 2000, Georgia's Rose Revolution in 2003, and Ukraine's Orange Revolution in 2004. These theories tie Soros to the ultimate protocols idea of a new world order, trying to destroy Russia by sponsoring pro-democracy, destabilizing movements along its borders. In 2016, Russian official channels even claimed Soros and OSF had provided the critical funding for the Panama Papers investigation, tying him to these global, transparent exposés of corruption.
Let's turn to the other major domestic political accusation, that Soros is secretly controlling elections and the justice system. First, the voting machines myth.
That claim is entirely baseless. Soros' spokesperson confirmed the billionaire has zero investment in any company that manufactures voting machines. The Open Society Foundation denies any involvement. Voting technology companies like Smartmatic and Dominion Voting Systems have both repeatedly and explicitly denied any financial connection to Soros, despite these sustained conspiracy theories pushed by figures like Sidney Powell. This claim is just pure fabrication designed to undermine faith in democratic processes.
And finally, we need to address the woke prosecutor myth. Critics argue that Soros is installing radical, soft-on-crime district attorneys. This area does have a direct funding trail, correct?
It does. So this is where legitimate political critique intersects with hyperbole. Soros funds liberal super PACs, such as Democracy PAC and Democracy PAC 2, and they donate significant sums to help elect Democrats and promote progressive causes. And that includes specific candidates for district attorney across the country. The funding is substantial, and it is targeted.
So what specifically is the criticism of these prosecutors drawing on sources like the Manhattan Institute?
The charge from conservative critics, like the Manhattan Institute, is that Soros is providing outsized funding to inexperienced politicians who have engaged in wholesale deprosecution of both felonies and misdemeanors. They argue that this approach, which includes refusing to prosecute certain low-level crimes, prioritizing diversion programs, and reducing prison sentences, is based on a utopian myth that ignores the hard reality of violent crime in America.
So this is presented as a fundamental philosophical disagreement on criminal justice. What's the evidence supporting the critics' claims?
Well, critics argue that this approach, particularly the rapid implementation of these deprosecution policies, has directly contributed to civic disorder and increased violence. They cite recent research suggesting a link between certain radical deprosecution policies and large, statistically significant increases in homicides and non-fatal shootings in the cities where these DAs operate. And they challenge Soros's defense that his own research does not link his prosecutors to crime increases by arguing that his supporting data often lacks statistical significance or relies on flawed methodologies.
And how do Soros and the prosecutors he supports defend their actions against these significant policy critiques?
They argue that their policies are rooted in principles of equity, racial justice, and the reduction of mass incarceration, which they believe contributes to community stability in the long run. They argue that aggressive prosecution of minor crimes destabilizes communities and that incarceration should be reserved for the most violent offenders. And they challenge the causal link between their reforms and generalized crime spikes, pointing instead to other factors like the COVID-19 pandemic, economic instability, and general police attrition.
And we've seen the political consequences of this high-stakes debate play out in elections.
Yes. The critics are quick to note that urban voters, reacting to perceived disorder and spikes in certain crime categories, have removed or recalled radical prosecutors supported by Soros-backed money. They point to the examples of Marilyn Mosby in Baltimore and Chesa Boudin in San Francisco, both of whom faced significant voter backlash. This demonstrates that the debate is a very real public policy argument happening just beneath that layer of conspiracy theory.
Okay, we've established that the attacks on George Soros are rooted in centuries of anti-Semitic conspiracy that criminalize his financial and philanthropic activities. This brings us to a crucial analytical question. If the right wing, particularly the populist movement, is truly opposed to concentrated wealth influencing democracy, why is Soros the singular focus when other extremely wealthy, politically active billionaires exist?
This is where the hypocrisy becomes, well, inescapable. Before we make the comparison, we have to reiterate the legitimate structural critique. Any large inherited family fortune, including the Soros families, helps perpetuate income inequality and concentrates political influence. And that concentration of power inherently interferes with true democracy, regardless of whether the causes funded are progressive or conservative. That is a structural issue, independent of George Soros's identity.
But the attacks aren't structural. They're aimed at the individual and his ideology. So let's bring in the comparison to Elon Musk, who is often hailed and celebrated by the very same right-wing populists who demonize Soros.
Elon Musk is the perfect foil. He is also an unfathomably wealthy billionaire who uses his financial resources to gain immense influence over politics, media, and government institutions. But their methods of influence differ radically. Soros primarily operates through philanthropy, moving money to external organizations. Musk, on the other hand, runs companies SpaceX and Tesla that are inextricably linked to national security and critical technology.
And that corporate structure gives him a level of direct operational power that Soros can only dream of.
Absolutely. The source material notes that Musk's companies received at least $15.4 billion in government contracts over the last 10 years. This means his influence isn't just charitable, it is deeply embedded in the state apparatus. Furthermore, Musk personally makes tactical decisions regarding crucial infrastructure, like Starlink satellite access, in active war zones like Ukraine, directly influencing the course of international conflict. His consolidation of power is open, it's corporate, and it's actively encouraged by the state.
Then you layer on his control over a global media platform, X, formerly Twitter. Soros is accused of having shadowy media influence, while Musk openly controls one of the largest information ecosystems in the world.
The contrast is stunning. Soros faces these constant, decades-old accusations of covert media manipulation, primarily because he funds independent journalistic initiatives in weaker democracies, a philanthropic act. Musk, since acquiring X, has wielded his control directly. He has suspended journalists who reported critically on him, dismantled independent fact-checking mechanisms, reinstated banned far-right accounts, actively amplified extremist rhetoric, and made algorithm changes that visibly boost far-right conspiracy theories to maximize engagement.
So we have Soros, who operates at arm's length through grant making, and Musk, who actively manages critical infrastructure and global media, and Soros is the designated global supervillain.
It results in this powerful rhetorical irony. Musk himself has become one of Soros's most vocal attackers. He publicly accused OSF of wanting nothing less than the destruction of Western civilization, and infamously compared Soros to the Jewish supervillain Magneto, drawing on classic anti-Semitic tropes through pop culture references.
And how do the populists reconcile celebrating Musk while simultaneously attacking Soros?
Oh. The justification is ideological control. Conservatives like Charlie Kirk celebrate Musk's actions, particularly his acquisition of X, as one of the greatest free speech victories in the history of Western civilization. They view his control as a necessary counterweight to the supposedly liberal media establishment. At the same time, they allege Soros seeks to destroy speech by funding liberal causes. The logic is simple. Consolidated power is good, provided it is our consolidated power.
So if we synthesize this contrasting treatment, what does it reveal about the true motivation of the anti-Soros crusade?
It reveals that the core problem for right-wing populism was never billionaire influence itself. The problem was liberal billionaire influence funding causes they opposed, like abortion rights, voting access, and democratic reform. The goal of the crusade is simple: to ensure that only an ideologically aligned elite holds power. Musk embodies the active, open consolidation of media, political, and economic power in a way Soros is only accused of doing covertly and conspiratorially. The rise of Musk proves that the populists were never opposed to elite control. They just wanted an authoritarian-friendly billionaire who aligned with their ideological goals, the kind of figure who operates proudly in the open.
And as we mentioned earlier, this Soros trope is not contained within U.S. borders. It's an easy-to-export foreign policy tool used by authoritarian leaders who want to deflect from their own governance failures.
The prime, most virulent example is Hungary, led by Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Orban has centered his entire populist platform on weaponizing anti-Soros campaigns, often deploying these virulently conspiratorial and anti-Semitic rhetoric, particularly when he's in conflict with the European Union over rule of law standards.
How did he use the Soros narrative specifically in relation to the EU?
In 2020, as Hungary threatened to veto the new EU budget over a rule of law conditionality mechanism, Orban claimed this mechanism was a plot to punish him for opposing the acceptance of 35 million migrants. And he blamed the entire supposed scheme on the Soros network. The message is clear. The reason Hungary is being criticized for its democratic backsliding isn't internal corruption. It's a foreign shadow puppet master trying to flood the country with migrants.
The rhetoric from Hungarian officials has reached historically shocking levels, especially considering Soros is a Holocaust survivor.
It has been deeply disturbing. One ministerial commissioner appointed by Orban wrote an article that compared Soros to Adolf Hitler, calling him the liberal Führer. The official stated, and I'm quoting here, "Toxic gas flows from the capsule of a multicultural open society, which is deadly to the European way of life." The official eventually retracted the article after condemnation, but the underlying sentiment that Soros and his open society vision are existential threats akin to poison or the Holocaust is consistently used.
And the staggering irony here, which you mentioned, is that Orban himself benefited directly from Soros's original pro-democracy mission.
The irony is profound enough to be a punchline. Orban himself was a recipient of a Soros scholarship in the late 1980s or early 1990s to study in the West. That was funding that was intended to help dissidents from communist regimes gain exposure to democratic thought. This pattern repeats. Other Fidesz officials, who are now staunchly anti-Soros, were also once recipients of Soros funding before they became anti-Soros fighters. They've taken the ideological template provided by Soros, the need for a singular, dangerous enemy, and simply switched the identity of the villain to Soros himself.
And where else have we seen the scapegoating playbook used internationally?
In Azerbaijan, President Ilham Aliyev used the same narrative when he was faced with internal dissent. He blamed the 2018 Armenian Revolution, which was a grassroots pro-democracy movement, on agents of the Soros Foundation. Aliyev went on to brag that he cut off their legs in Azerbaijan, claiming they were poisoning the minds of youth and turning them against their state. Again, any successful pro-democracy movement is immediately delegitimized by claiming it is merely a funded, foreign plot orchestrated by Soros.
Looking forward, George Soros is now 92. Is there any chance these attacks will subside as he steps away from the day-to-day operations?
Based on the succession plans, it's highly unlikely. In 2023, George Soros handed control of his Open Society Foundations, which manages an immense $25 billion endowment, to his son, Alexander Soros. And Alex Soros has stated that he is more political than his father. He intends to focus political donations heavily on causes like voting rights, abortion rights, and counteracting the influence of the populist right in both the U.S. and Europe. The Soros name will remain attached to major, contested, progressive political causes. This suggests the political and conspiratorial targeting is likely to continue for the foreseeable future, just shifting the generational face of the puppet master.
This has been a necessary and a sobering deep dive. We started by analyzing the severity of the modern political and legal threats being weighed by the Justice Department, RICO, arson, material support of terrorism against the Open Society Foundations.
And we established that these specific modern attacks are explicitly linked to ancient, baseless anti-Semitic myths about Jewish global control. We traced the playbook back to the details found in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. We showed that claims about Soros funding violence are factually contradicted by data showing the vast majority of domestic terrorism originates from the right, and that claims of paying 2024 student protesters rely on distorting grants given years earlier for legitimate advocacy work.
Here is where the analysis becomes truly profound. The deep irony demonstrated by the rise of Elon Musk. The populist right successfully demonized Soros for covertly funding liberal causes through philanthropy while simultaneously celebrating and defending Musk's direct, hands-on, and immense consolidation of media, political, and corporate power in favor of their own ideological goals.
And that synthesis highlights the true utility of the Soros myth. Conspiracy theories are like viruses. They change and mutate the character, from the Illuminati to the Rothschilds, Bill Gates, or Soros, but they consistently reappear during times of crisis and social unrest. Their fundamental function is never to identify the truth. Their function is to delegitimize the protests and the actual reasons behind them. They distract society from genuine social unrest, structural economic issues, and the visible mechanics of concentrated power.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner?
We've analyzed two distinct types of concentrated power: the kind Soros is accused of having, shadowy, globalist, hidden, and the kind Musk actively demonstrates: direct, open, consolidated corporate and state power. The discussion revealed that the true threat is the successful conflation of legitimate philanthropic debate with fabricated, politically motivated accusations of racketeering and terrorism. So the final question for you is this: if the true mechanics of concentrated power, the manipulation of media, the acquisition of government contracts, the influence over international conflict, now operate proudly and openly under the banner of a celebrated ideological ally, are we still equipped to recognize the real power dynamics at play? Or are we permanently distracted by the search for the phantom villain?